He moved over when Dirk sat next to him, and though he wanted to lean against him for a bit of comfort, he couldn't do that here. The guys knew they were a couple. That had been made plain last fall when Dirk had rescued him from the flooded spring run and kissed him in front of half the company. However, both of them had been circumspect about their behavior at work, conscientiously keeping their behavior professional.
"You look beat,"
Dirk told him quietly, and Lee nodded. "My shift is over in half an hour," Lee supplied, waiting to see how Dirk would react. Most nights they spent together either at his place or at Dirk's, but sometimes Dirk needed his space. Lee was fine with that, usually. He just hoped tonight wasn't one of those nights.
"I'm gonna take off. There isn't anything any of us can do tonight. I'll see you at my place?"
Dirk asked, and Lee nodded, trying to return his attention to what the captain was saying.
"The captains will compile a list of projects we believe can get done to help spruce up the place and post it on the board in the private quarters. That way, if we get a visit, it'll be less conspicuous."
"Cap, do you really think spruce-up projects are going to help?" Gerald, one of the younger firefighters, asked.
"I think the council's on the bubble. We need to move him in our favor, and every little bit could help,"
Captain Carter answered. "If you say so, but this place needs new bathrooms, a new kitchen, roof, tuck pointing of the brick. There are lots of things that haven't been done in years because the borough never allocates enough money. We're paying for their cheapness now," Gerald said in a huff, and most of the other men grumbled their agreement. Lee knew he was probably right, but refrained from commenting. All he wanted to do was get to Dirk's so he could forget about houses exploding and borough councils that might shut down the station. He needed some quiet time and a chance to get out of his head for a while.
"All we can do is what's within our power,"
Captain Carter explained, and the session broke up as the men who weren't on shift began to head out. The others looked dazed, and most of them sat or stood alone with their thoughts, while others drifted away to get their assignments for the day completed. Lee gathered his things together, praying there wasn't another call as he waited for the next shift to arrive. After turnover, he headed to his bike and rode through the lighted streets to Dirk's house. He parked in front of the house and entered through the front door without knocking. Dirk met him in the living room, and Lee dropped his bag, yanking Dirk to him without a word before crashing their mouths together. Lee took possession of Dirk's mouth, devouring him as he tried to let work go, needing something intense to push away his day. Luckily, Dirk was up for it, and Lee got as good as he gave.
"You need to eat?"
Dirk asked once the kiss broke, and Lee shook his head, lifting Dirk into a fireman's carry before turning to start climbing the stairs.
"Okay then,"
Dirk said, knowing that words weren't needed. Lee bounced Dirk on the bed and then began pulling off his lover's clothes. A few buttons on his shirt may have come off. Lee couldn't quite tell, and fuck if he really cared. His vision and his needs centered around his lover, and once he was naked, Lee tugged off his own clothes before climbing on the bed and sucking Dirk's cock down his throat. The nearly strangled cry Dirk made was all Lee needed to hear. They could be tender and careful with each other, but tonight Lee needed rough, and all of Dirk's signals told him he was ready and willing. Vacuum cleaners had nothing on Lee when he got going, and the room filled with Dirk's cries and groans as Lee tasted and damn near devoured his lover.
"Lee, coming!"
Dirk cried. And Lee sucked harder, feeling Dirk explode and swallowing every drop before kneeling and flipping Dirk onto his belly without waiting. "Need you bad, Dirk," Lee grunted, his brain completely fogged with lust and need. He had the presence of mind to find the bottle of lube from the stand, slicking his fingers before burying them in Dirk's ass. He wasn't soft or gentle, and he heard Dirk cry out as he squirmed beneath him. Then he slicked himself as he gave Dirk a few more finger thrusts before pulling out, then sinking his cock into Dirk with what he knew was a fast, eye-popping, breath-stealing movement. And only once he was buried in Dirk did some of the urgency fade away, as the feeling of Dirk's body around him helped to ground some of his nearly out-of-control emotions. Lee pulled out and drove into Dirk's body, using all his weight, and then stopped, wondering if he was hurting Dirk.
"Fuck me like you mean it,"
Dirk growled from under him, and Lee felt the strings that held his control began to stretch and break. His hips snapped and pounded into Dirk, the bed bouncing, Dirk's body gripping him hard and strong.
That's it,
Dirk encouraged, and Lee snapped his hips again, giving Dirk everything he had. Without warning, Lee pulled out and flipped Dirk onto his back like he was a rag doll. Shrugging Dirk's legs over his shoulders, he drove back into his lover, meeting his gaze as Dirk growled, and Lee returned it with another snap of his hips. "Not hurting you, am I?" Lee grunted between thrusts, and Dirk gripped him tighter.
"No fucking way,"
he answered, meeting each of Lee's thrusts with a cry.
"You're an amazing stud."
Dirk grabbed him by the shoulders and tugged him forward, their lips crashing together in a bruising kiss of lips, tongue, and teeth that left Lee breathless. "I fucking need you," Lee growled as his hips continued moving. Dirk's expression told Lee he fully understood and would give him whatever he needed. Lee pounded into Dirk, fucking him to within an inch of both their lives. The room got hotter and hotter, sweat pouring down Lee's chest, but he didn't pause or let up. His mind still threatened to go in a million different directions, and when he couldn't take any more, he screamed as his climax slammed into his chest like a body blow. He heard Dirk cry out as well, seeing his mouth hang open as he came, shooting in high arcs onto his chest. The last of Lee's flagging energy left his big body, and he collapsed onto Dirk's chest, breathing like a chugging freight train. Floating on waves of endorphins until his heart slowed, he barely registered Dirk encircling him in his arms.
"Do you want to tell me what that was all about?"
Dirk asked, and Lee nodded, but didn't say anything.
"If you're not ready, I understand."
"Can't talk," Lee grunted, and continued waiting to catch his breath. Once he could remember his name again, he slowly began to tell Dirk about rescuing the kid and how the house had blown up right behind him. They were storing 10 gallons of gasoline in their basement. The entire place could have gone up at any time, and we were all fucking lucky to get out alive. Lee had found out that the others who were in the kitchen had gotten out and were knocked over by the explosion, but hadn't been hurt. Those kids were lucky they didn't get blown up or poisoned in their sleep. Dirk shifted, and Lee rolled onto his side. He could feel Dirk shaking next to him. Dirk wasn't a big one to talk about his feelings, but Lee had always been able to read him like a book, and that shaking combined with the way Dirk tightened his grip conveyed his lover's fear better than any words could ever have done.
"We all know the danger is part of a job,"
Dirk told him.
"But it sucks when the danger comes so close."
Lee saw Dirk's eyes close and felt him quiver.
"It's okay for it to get to you."
Lee grunted softly because he could almost hear Dirk's thoughts. "It's okay for you to feel scared as well. I know I would if our positions were reversed." Lee rested his head on Dirk's shoulder, listening to his lover's heartbeat as he wrapped an arm around his chest. He needed to feel close to someone. Lee had come close to death before. The danger came with the job. Everyone in the company knew it, and so did he. But when it happened, it brought the fear and sense of mortality closer to home. "I'd be scared of losing you." Lee tilted his head up so he could see Dirk's expression, and he saw a slight smile and felt Dirk's arms squeeze him for a few seconds. "It's okay to talk, Dirk."
"I don't want to lose you either,"
Dirk finally whispered. "Was that so hard?" Lee taunted with a smile before shifting so he could kiss him. "I figure I need to start rewarding you for opening your mouth and talking to me. It may come as a surprise to you, but I can't actually read your mind." Lee tugged Dirk into a harder kiss. "I think we better shower before we go to bed, otherwise we're going to end up stuck together."
"There are worse things I can think of than being stuck to you,"
Dirk told him sweetly, and Lee tried not to make too much of it, even as he realized what Dirk was saying in his own way. Lee got up and waited for Dirk, who went into the bathroom. Lee heard the water running as he slowly followed behind. He was both tired and sore. Stepping under the water, Lee felt his muscles relax, and when Dirk stepped in behind him, Dirk stroked and massaged his shoulders. Lee groaned softly as the tightness and tension leached out of his muscles. Then Dirk stepped closer, his chest pressing to Lee's back as Dirk wrapped his arms around his chest.
I do love you, Lee.
Dirk said from behind him.
I know I don't tell you as often as I should, but I do.
Lee turned in Dirk's arms, the water running down his head and then pounding on his sore back. I know you do. I know you don't say it that often, but you show it, and that's what counts. Most of the time. Lee pressed Dirk back against the tile, kissing him hard. Dirk hugged him tight, and Lee continued pressing, his skin sliding against Dirk's. He needed to feel close to Dirk for a while, and once their kiss ended, Dirk reached for the shower gel and began soaping his hands. Lee closed his eyes and let Dirk soap and care for his big body. There were times when Dirk could be one of the most caring and thoughtful people Lee had ever met. And then there were other times. Lee pushed those out of his mind as Dirk carefully washed his cock and balls, prolonging the process. Lee knew Dirk was playing with him, and that was another of the things he liked. Sometimes for no apparent reason, Dirk would act like a wide-eyed kid, as he appeared now. It didn't happen often, but when it did, it was special and rather endearing. Feels good, Lee said softly, and Dirk answered with a lopsided grin.
It's supposed to,
Dirk said before turning him. Lee parted his legs and closed his eyes as Dirk stroked his hands over his skin, slick, smooth, and intimate. When Dirk had finished, Lee rinsed off, and Dirk stepped under the water for a quick rinse before turning it off. Don't you need a wash? Lee asked, a bit surprised. Dirk shook his head, opening the shower door and reaching for towels.
This was all for you. I'm good.
Dirk stepped out, and Lee followed. They dried themselves, and Dirk did Lee's back for him. He loved that. Dirk had a special touch, and Lee reveled in it. When they were done, Dirk hung up the towels, and the two of them climbed back in bed.
You're awfully quiet,
Dirk said after a few minutes, and Lee shifted, not really sure this was the right time to bring up what was on his mind, but he decided to do it anyway. Do you really think they'll close the station?
They might. We're the oldest company in town, but the building is in rough shape. They could close it and keep the museum portion and the original firehouse open. I don't think you have anything to worry about. If they do, we'll move to one of the other two companies, and it'll be fine. They said over and over they weren't looking to cut personnel.
Lee shifted until he was lying on his side, resting his head on his hand. You believe them? We're doing this to cut costs, and with fewer companies, they won't need as many firefighters. They'll cut positions, maybe not right away, but you know